Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Weiser Cornell, author of The Power of Focusing and Untangling How You Can Transform What's Impossibly Stuck. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you my secrets to being calm and centered even in stressful times, and how you can release your blocks to living the full, beautiful life that you were born to live. Tune in to the end, and I'll tell you how to get my free course on getting bigger than what's bugging you. I can't wait. This is going to be great.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Weiser Cornell. She is an author. The book is called The Power of Focusing and also Untangling How You Can Transform What's Impossibly Stuck. So, Anne's got a lifelong fascination, as she says in her bio, of why people get stuck. And I'm actually pretty fascinated with that too. It's very frustrating when, personally, I know people that have such great potential and they just can't seem to get unstuck, I guess is a good way to put it. So I would love to hear, and I'm sure we're going to hear, about techniques for people to help themselves get unstuck. So welcome, Anne. Thanks for coming.
A pleasure to be here, Richard.
Yeah. Well, just so the audience knows, Anne was really gracious. She sent me a copy of her book, Focusing. And even before we started interacting like now, she's just been great. So I just want to publicly thank you for that, Anne. So thanks for coming. Tell me a bit about your background. How did you get to figure out the concept of focusing and, what is it? But what was life like before you figured this out?
Oh, well, I have to confess that I'm not the one who invented the concept of focusing. It was developed by my mentor. His name's Eugene Gendlin. He was doing research at the University of Chicago, and I met him when he was about 45 and I was about 22. And I was a student of linguistics. I wasn't even trying to learn psychology. But Gene Gendlin was teaching his method for free in a community church. It was the 70s. The early 70s, which is what we now think of called the 60s. There was student unrest. There was anti-war protests. People were needing something to help them with the turmoil and stress. Not as stressful a time as nowadays, but still, looking back on that. And he was teaching for free in a community church, and he taught this method that he had discovered. He called it focusing, and he discovered it by doing research along with some other people on successful versus unsuccessful psychotherapy. So they were listening to tapes of hundreds of sessions classified into successful psychotherapy versus unsuccessful psychotherapy, trying to listen to what made the difference between the ones that were going to be successful and the ones that were not. And their first thought was, well, we're going to hear the therapists doing something different in the sessions that will ultimately be successful. They could not find a difference in what the therapists were doing. They were pretty much equally empathic and connecting relationally and intelligent and articulate. The therapists weren't any better in the successful therapy sessions. So they had the brilliant idea not to give up the research at that point, but instead to see if they could tell the difference between the clients who were going to be successful and the clients who were not going to be successful. Now, all those clients were equally confused and emotionally overwhelmed and struggling, yet they noticed a difference, a very small but hugely significant difference in the clients that were going to ultimately be successful in their therapy. Those clients, they tended even the very first session to pause sometimes when they were talking and say, now, wait a minute, gosh, how would I say this? It's right here, but I can't put this into words very well. In other words, they sometimes groped for words for something they were feeling at that very moment that they couldn't express easily. In contrast, the clients who tended not to be successful in therapy just stayed at a very articulate level. Yeah, my problem is this, and my mother this, and my father that, and they never slowed down. They never paused. They never, I'm feeling something here right now. So what Gemlin decided was, gosh, the best thing I could do for my clients, if I'm a psychotherapist, is to teach them how to do this. Because otherwise, I'm not actually being an ethical therapist. So he developed a method for teaching people how to do that thing that was associated with positive life change. And he named it focusing. And it's not, right. People think focusing like, oh, that means you can concentrate better. Well, it's not that meaning of focusing. It's the meaning of focusing where something that's unclear becomes more clear. If you pause right now and let awareness come to your body, down into that area that includes your throat, your chest, your stomach, there'll be something there. Most of us go around not noticing. But here I am doing a podcast with somebody who's very, very nice, but who I've never met before. And when I feel my solar plexus, down below my chest, there's a little bit of kind of a nervous excitement there. But I pause and notice that, and then I acknowledge it. Yeah, I'm noticing. Hello, I know you're there. I'm noticing it. And it releases a bit. And that's basically focusing. Well, I learned it from him.
So it's noticing what's going on in your body in response to, like I've had, sometimes I've had bad news and I felt like sick to my stomach or anger. I've felt, my heart going faster or, my shoulders getting tighter. Things like that. So noticing what's going on in your body when you're in a certain situation, but then what do you do with it? So, please go on.
So the next step is to create a relationship with what you're feeling. And this was what I contributed to Gentlin's work. So I became so excited about this process that after teaching linguistics for a few years, I left the field of linguistics and went to assist Gene Genlin in his workshops and became one of the first full-time teachers of focusing myself. And I added to what he was doing by emphasizing what I call inner relationship. An inner relationship means, okay, you found that place in your body that's tense because of something that's going on or angry because of what that person said. And you use some words that I've developed. You say, I am sensing something in me feels, let's say, angry. And there's all the difference between I'm so angry and I'm sensing something in me is feeling angry right now. And you can feel there's a little more space. There's a little more ease. You're still angry, probably for some good reason, but now you have a relationship with the place in you that's angry. And you can say hello. I'm saying hello to it. And I'm sitting down with it. So the metaphor of imagining that you can have a kind of conversation with something you're feeling inside. And I'm saying hello to that nervous feeling or tight feeling or whatever it is. I'm sitting down with it to get to know it better. I'm letting it know I'm here to listen. And what I've discovered as I've worked with thousands of people over the years is that many people try to change what they're feeling or talk themselves out of what they're feeling, especially if it's a stressful feeling. Like, I shouldn't be feeling that way. I don't need to feel that way. There's nothing to be afraid of. And that actually keeps things unchanged. Whereas if you say to your feeling of fear, hello, I know you're there. I'm listening. Do you want to tell me more about what you're afraid about? And it's not like your feelings sort of open up little mouths and talk to you, but there is a communication. Like, as I sit with it, I realize that the real reason it's scared is that I'm not sure I can do it. Okay. So there's a step of realization there. You say, okay, I hear that. It's something about not being sure you can do it. So it's a series of inner invitations that make up a conversation. It leads to what we call a felt shift. which means that these bodily feelings, they let go of you. They may even change to a really positive, enjoyable feeling. Like, oh, now I know what that was all about. And I'm feeling relaxation through my whole body now.
Well, that happened a bit. I have an experience early in the day and, I feel like someone was a jerk and then it makes me mad and it colors if I don't watch out, it'll color my interactions throughout the rest of the day. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes I'm self-aware enough to say like, oh, I know why I'm mad because this and that happened. So it seems to take the edge off for some reason, acknowledging it.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad you've had that experience. Exactly.
It's weird. Dude, it doesn't really make sense why it does it. I was going to ask you, like, why do you think it helps?
Well, one of my favorite quotes from my teacher is, what is not felt remains the same. When it is felt, it changes. He says, we think we make ourselves good by not allowing the feeling of our negative ways, but that just keeps them the same. And I would add to that emotion, whether it's an emotion you give a name to, like anger, fear, sadness, and so on, or whether it's a body sensation like clenching or heaviness, the destiny of all of those feelings is to change. The word emotion has the word motion in it for a good reason. The purpose of an emotion is to connect us to how we feel and what we need, and then change. Be on its way. Something else replaces it. And when emotional states stay on, it's probably because we've been trying to dismiss them, ignore them, push them away. We feel guilty for feeling that way. For all kinds of reasons, we've not been allowing those feelings. When I say allowing those feelings, I don't mean that if you're angry, you need to smash something. What I mean is inwardly say, yeah, I sense there's anger here. Let me sit and sense more what it was that brought that. And, that's what it was. And that's the natural state of things. The mystery is why things stay stuck and don't change. So my mission in life is to help people be more aware of how they're feeling and have a good relationship, a positive relationship with their feeling.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Do people ever have a sarcastic response like, I'm feeling anger, and then they say to themselves, no, of course, I don't know, does that ever happen, or is that just...
Sure, all kinds of things happen. Yeah, but people usually come to me because they're interested in learning how to shift their stressful feelings and be more relaxed in their lives, so it's unlikely that a sarcastic response would come, but if it did, we'll be curious about that. Curiosity, I think, is one of the greatest approaches to anything in life, any person or situation. If I can be curious, keep an open mind, wonder, let's see, what's going on here? What's upsetting this person so much, So we have curiosity toward ourselves.
What if you're feeling just really, really super emotional? You're having a panic attack, or you're just like in the throes of intense fear or something else, or grief. Does this work to recognize those emotions too? Or like, what do you do with that? Do you need to de-escalate first before you can sense what's going on with you?
Well, this is a de-escalating process, an emotional regulation process. Grief is an interesting one. I would not say something in me is grieving or something in you is grieving. I think grief is a whole body experience. I tend to trust grief. I think that it's a natural response to loss. But I would invite people to say, I am sensing the grief. I am sensing the grieving that's happening in me now. I am staying with it. I'm keeping it company. I'm aware of it. And I think the biggest problem with grief is when we resist it, when we've been told by other people, you should be over that already, or we've been trying to argue ourselves out of it, or how could I be feeling this bad? It was only a cat, But when you trust your own emotional responses and stay with them instead of trying to push them away, but be present. Like, I am here with this. I am feeling this. It's never too much. It's never more than you can handle.
So does the body reward you for acknowledging the feelings that it's giving you?
Yeah. Usually there is a sense of release, relief, a deeper breath, the shoulders relax. Maybe not immediately, but pretty soon there's a thank you almost inside. It's almost as if something from inside you has been knocking on your door forever. I've had people I work with tell me, well, now I'm in touch with this place inside and I'm listening to it and it tells me, where have you been for so long? And I say, well, obviously, it's really glad you're here now. Let it know you hear that.
What's interesting is, from what I've learned and seen, that people need to be heard and then they feel better, psychologically. So this is like an analog to it. The body needs to be heard. So when you acknowledge it, it thanks you and it resolves something inside yourself. So again, just as emotionally, you need to be heard by someone else. For your own self, again, you need to acknowledge what your body's saying to you.
They're exactly analogous to each other. Yeah, I love that you pointed that out. I think that we can give to ourselves the same kind of compassion that we could give to someone else. And, from time to time, one of them is easier than the other, right? It might be easier for me to listen to myself. That other person drives me so nuts that I don't want to listen to them, or vice versa. It might be easier to listen to another person, but you treat yourself as if your worst enemy. Working with either one of those sides of things can help the other one develop. Often nice to others. Can I treat myself with the same kindness that I treat others with? Often what I see in people is that they don't treat themselves very kindly. And I'm often saying to people, be gentle with yourself. Treat yourself as gently as you would another person. And they're like, I don't know, if I treat myself gently, I'll never get anything done, or it'll mean that the bad things I've done are being excused. And it can be really hard. But being gentle with yourself is such a beautiful process.
It seems like a really simple concept.
I know.
Any examples come to mind, like from the mouths of other people, you've helped them to learn this, they do it, and they told you about a really, uplifting experience or something that made you feel really good that you helped them?
Well, that's an interesting question. I like to tell my own story, how I released writer's block. I got into my 40s. I was already teaching this method, and I really had a lifelong yearning to be a writer. And by that time, what I wanted to write was a book about this process. And my teacher had already written a book about it, and it almost felt like maybe I shouldn't take away anything from him by writing another book about it, or maybe nobody would want to see another book about it, or what do I have to say that's different? And anyway, I kept trying to write this new book and getting stuck and dragging to a halt and coming up with nothing for years. And then one day, I decided to use the very method I was talking about to work with the block to writing. I decided to assume that there was a part of me that didn't want to write, even though all that was in my conscious mind was, I want to write, I don't know why I can't. And I sat down with a focusing partner, because that's often how we do it. We trade time with another person. One person does the focusing process and the other person is a listener. And I sat down with Bonnie and I invited the part of me that didn't want to write and kept my awareness in my body. So let's see, how does this feel in my body if I invite the part of me that doesn't want to write? And after a while, after some time went by, I did begin to feel something in my chest. And then it was hard to articulate, but I took the time. Slowly, I began to be able to put it into words, what I was feeling in my chest. It was almost like a squeezing movement that if I gave into it, it would move the top of my body forward, like my shoulders were hunching. And suddenly I realized it's ducking. My body wants to duck. And then I got an image that I was on a firing range with those big targets with colored circles on them, but I was standing in front of the target and I needed to duck. And so as part of the process, I didn't understand yet what that meant, but part of the process is to put off trying to understand things and just trust and go ahead with it. So I said to my body, okay, I get what you're showing me. You're showing me ducking and you're showing me standing in front of a target and afraid to be shot at. And then I stayed with it longer. It's like, what else do you want to show me about that? And within a minute or so, I started to get some memories from my childhood. And I remembered instances where I would be expressing myself or showing off, and my father would be, I guess you could say, shooting me down with his words. Those memories came vividly in that moment. Like, oh, that's what this place in my body is trying to protect me from being shot down by my father. And then I said to it, do I have this right? Is it that what you're protecting me from? And there was a big relaxing in my body. And my father, now I was in my 40s, my father was no longer with us at this point. But what we often find is that we carry younger versions of ourselves in our bodies. Unresolved trauma from the past gets frozen, and we carry it unchanged in the body. And things that are going on right now that are mysteriously blocked may have to do with this unresolved trauma from the past.
I don't think you turn your body into a Ouija board in a way. You know?
In a way, you are listening to something that you don't yet understand. In that sense, yes. And it gets easier and easier when you do it because you get positive feedback right away. But there is a quality of trust involved. And many of us, especially those of us who like to read books and think a lot, we have a tendency to want to understand things immediately. And in this case, that can actually interfere, as you can imagine. Right? What does this mean? I got to think about this. I got to understand this. No, just wait a while and let it come from inside. That's what I do. I teach people how to do that. It's an interesting process. So yes, since I've now written 6 books, my writer's block did dissolve after not just one session like that, but maybe 5 or 6. I'm very happy.
It's cool that there's another way for you to understand yourself and help yourself using the feelings in your body. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. It helps with so many different things. Yeah.
Well, I liked your story a lot. Any other stories of, people that have done this and gotten just really unusual or interesting effects?
Well, I don't know about unusual. I mean, I see a lot of positive change in a direction like this. One story I tell about in my Untangling book, that's a book I wrote with a co-author, is a man who worked with us for several years, a man in his middle 30s. He had a rough childhood. He was aware that his father angered easily, and when his father was angry, he might hit his kids. And this young man was afraid that, well, he just didn't want to be around his father. He didn't like him. He didn't feel safe with him, and he felt like his mother hadn't protected him. And time had passed, He wanted at least to have some relationship with his parents, but he'd also moved to a city far, far away and kept his relationship with them to a minimum. And things were going well for him. He'd quit smoking, which was something he wanted to do. And he'd also been doing this work with me and in my classes. And at some point, he got the feeling that, well, maybe he'd be ready to visit his parents again. Now, what the work he'd been doing with me had a lot to do with befriending the younger part of himself. I call it the younger you. So this younger him inside, the one that went through that abuse in his childhood and was still frozen, still carrying it around as a bit of a mistrust of life itself, and that was starting to soften and loosen. So the relationship with the part of him inside that was frozen around trusting other people and so on, that had started to change. So he thought, okay, let me try visiting my parents. I thought this was funny. He said, I resolved I would take up smoking again just for the week I was with them so that I'd have some emotional cushion on my feelings. And that's how much he anticipated that week with them was going to be difficult. And in fact, it wasn't difficult. He saw his parents in a new way. He was able to be with them differently, and he had an openness to them that he hadn't had before. He never did take up smoking while he was there. And what he told me was it became easy to be with his parents because he was no longer waiting for them to love and approve him. They were just humans like he was, that he had already learned to love and approve himself. And that had taken a huge weight off of his relationship with his parents.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I think that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Have you had people that they do this and then does the feeling ever intensify instead of going away? Does it ramp up and people get scared and back off of it?
Well, the feeling can intensify instead of going away. But what I tell people if that happens is, hey, you haven't been in there listening for a while. It has a lot to tell you. It needs to tell you not just that it hurts, but how much it hurts. And what I want you to do back is to say, yeah, I get it. I get that this is really strong. And I get that you've been waiting a long time to show me these feelings. And then I bet you that in 10 or 15 minutes, this will ease off. So that's what we're talking about almost always. One of the things that happens more often than feelings get too intense, the other thing that happens more often is that people get scared they will get too intense. See, that's a slightly different situation. Like, I don't want to do this because I'm scared what I'm going to find, and so on. And I say, well, then let's turn toward the part of you that's scared what you're going to find and be with that for a while. Listen to that for a while. So there's always something that we can turn toward and be with. I remember my teacher when I was assisting him in the classes, which was my real education in this method. He would say to the group, focusing requires a friendly attitude to whatever comes up in you. And then somebody in the group would raise their hand, always, invariably, they would raise their hand and they would say, but what if I can't be friendly to what I feel inside? Good question. And he would answer, then see if you can be friendly to that. So can you be friendly to this not being friendly inside of you? And to me, that was mind-blowing. It was really all the rest of my work since then, in the last 50 years, has been based on that one insight, that if you don't like your feelings, you can turn toward the not liking, the feeling of not liking, and then that feeling will show you something. And so what I think is really revelatory here is that we never have to make ourselves feel any particular way. Like a little while ago, I was saying to you, be gentle to it. I say that to my students. Let's be gentle to that feeling. Let's be compassionate. Let's be empathic. But as soon as they say, I can't, I don't want to. Oh, okay, that's fine. Then let's see if we can be gentle to that. Let's see if we can be empathic to the one in you that doesn't want to be empathic to that other feeling. And they can do that. So we're never trying to force ourselves to feel anything. We're never trying to fight our feelings. There's always something that's possible. And as we do that, we're kind of exercising the muscle of being friendly and compassionate and accepting toward ourselves. One of my other books is called The Radical Acceptance of Everything, because this is a very accepting process. And it turns out that there aren't any enemies inside of us. There's nothing in us that's been trying to sabotage. I don't believe in the concept of inner saboteurs. Nothing in us has been trying to sabotage us or hurt us or damage us. Everything in us has been trying to save us somehow. See, even the part of me that didn't want me to write was blocking me from writing the books I wanted to write. It wasn't doing that to hurt me. We discovered that it was doing that to save me from being shot at verbally.
Are there people that trust their body?
There sure are.
What happens to, what process do they have to go through to be able to trust their own body?
It's the same thing. Let's be with the not trusting.
Okay, so you'd say acknowledge even the negative feeling, the bad feeling and all that, and then the insight will still come.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like you're eating a bowl of oatmeal. I often use this analogy with my students. Let's say you're served a bowl of oatmeal that's really hot, and it's too hot, and you can't stick your spoon in the center of the bowl because it's way too hot, but you could maybe eat around the edges.
Yep.
Either way, you get all the oatmeal. So the person says, this feeling of anxiety, it's too big, it's too much for me, I can't stand to be with it. Okay, then let's be with the one in you who can't stand to be with it and just hang out there. And that will do the same kind of process. Yeah.
It actually works well with the oatmeal example because, as you eat the outsides, now the concentric inner parts are exposed and they cool off, so you eat your way to the center.
And so just like all the oatmeal. And it's never too much. It's never too hot. Yeah.
So like too hot in emotion, right? You approach it from the outside, you nibble away at the edges, and you'll get into the middle at some point.
That's right. That's what I mean. There's always something you can be with. And wherever you are is the right place to be. As long as you're giving that kind of gentle, compassionate attention to something, then it changes your whole system, makes it possible for everything to ultimately be accepted and changed.
Well, I guess I like to make jokes, but it'd be funny if you have Focusing sponsored by Quaker Oats. The Omeo example.
I should reach out to them.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
No, that's really interesting that even if it sounds mysterious, but it also sounds just, I guess, just really interesting. You're like yielding to what the body is telling you. And what happens with a panic attack? What's going on there? You just haven't been listening to your body, and now it's like, all right, we're going to remind you really strongly, or like what's going on when that happens?
Yeah, well, I can't tell you all the neurological details of that, but I can say that very strong feelings that come on suddenly like that, the same process I'm talking about yields results. I also teach people to put a gentle hand on their body somewhere. If you're feeling strong feelings in your stomach or your chest, let a gentle hand go there. As if with your hand, you're saying, I'm with you now. I'm here now. No, I've never had a panic attack, but I do get quite anxious about turbulence when flying. And I remember a time when I was on the plane was still on the ground, but it was a stormy day and it wasn't a very big plane. And my stomach was as tight as a knot. And I hate that feeling of being so afraid and anxious. So as a last resort, I used my own method. And there, sitting on the tarmac, on the runway, I just started talking to my stomach and saying, I get how scared you are, and I'm with you. And at first, it made no difference. I had to say it patiently again, I think about 5 times. And finally, the 5th time, I think I said it, there was finally it got through to that anxious part of me that I was there with it, that it wasn't alone. And I could feel the relaxation come into my body. And then the plane took off, and it was not the smoothest ride I've ever been on, but my stomach stayed relaxed the whole time. So,
great. Yeah. How effective is this when you as the counselor are talking to someone's stomach or, back or whatever it is, or neck, versus them talking to it themselves? Like with the first few sessions, maybe be with a counselor where they would, do this in a guided way, and then you can learn how to do it better on your own?
From the very start, I'm inviting people into their own inner relationship. So if the person says to me, I feel really scared, I'll say, you might want to sense where in your body you feel that scared feeling. And then they pause a minute and they say, it's this clenching feeling in my heart. And I'll say, so you might check with that clenching feeling in your heart, if clenching is the right word to describe it. So each thing I say to the person I'm working with, my client, is an invitation for them to do inner sensing. And they say, yeah, it's clenching. And then I say, well, see if it would be okay now to say hello to it inside. And they say, okay, I did that. It's slightly eased, but it's still really tight. And then I give them another thing to do and another thing to do. So they're the one doing the sensing, and I'm like coaching them to what they might want to say next. And depending on what happens and what they tell me, I'll suggest something else. So that's...
Is it ever hostile where you acknowledge the feeling and then it actually intensifies or gets worse? So you said people are afraid it will, but can you say the wrong thing where it will backfire?
One thing that comes to mind as you ask that question is that people can find feelings inside them that don't trust them. Like, I'm in touch with it and it's telling me it doesn't trust me. And
your body will tell you that it doesn't trust you, the person.
That's right. Your body will tell you that it doesn't trust you. Not just your whole body, but this place, this part inside of you, this anxious part or this angry part or this scared part. You say hello to it and it says, I don't trust you. And so people will say that. If I'm working with them, they'll say, well, I did what you suggested. And what I'm getting is that this place inside me doesn't trust me. And so we have an interesting process now to build trust again. And the thing I say to the person is, well, let it know it's okay if it doesn't trust you, because you can't make trust happen. Trust needs to be built. Trust builds in a relationship because you keep showing up and you keep doing the right thing. So let it know it's okay if it doesn't trust you. Another thing people say to me is, I know it's here, but it's hiding. And it may be hiding because it doesn't trust them or it doesn't trust something else. So it's hiding. You sense that it's hiding. Okay, let it know it's okay to hide. So this acceptance, this it's okay the way it is really a way to meet any of these situations that you're asking me about. It intensifies, it doesn't trust, and so on. Okay, let it know it's okay if it's that way.
That's really interesting. It's like approaching a scared or like a frightened animal or something. Seems like some of your examples.
You're so right, Richard. I often tell people if they're having a hard time being trusting and gentle to themselves inside, to their own scared places inside, I say, hey, imagine that you took home a rescue dog that had been mistreated in one of its previous homes. And the dog just wanted to hide under the house all the time and would snap at you whenever you brought your hand close to it. You wouldn't blame the dog. You wouldn't feel like that was a bad dog. You would realize that it's gone through something hard and that what it needs is for you to not chase after it and try to grab it, but for you to just sit down very quietly somewhere and let it learn to trust you and let it come out and trust and approach you. And people get that analogy. So that's exactly what it's like. Winning the trust takes time, but it's worth it.
Does anyone, I guess I'm from New York, that's why. So it seems like some people would be very skeptical, like, come on, talk to your body like this. Or have you ever had someone that, again, said, help me, and then when you're trying to help them, they come back with responses and they block themselves from being able to help?
It is hard to believe if you haven't been doing this for a while. But I remember a guy, his wife sent him to me, and he said, I don't know what I'm doing here, really. My wife keeps asking me how I am, and I tell her I don't know. And she's so fed up with me not knowing how I feel that she sent me to you to learn how to know what I feel. But I really don't know if this is even something I can do, or why should I do it? And I said, yeah, well, let's give it a try and see what happens. And so I started by just guiding him into body awareness, feel his body resting on the chair, feel his feet, feel his back leaning on the chair, and then go feel inside, feel your throat, feel your chest, feel your stomach from the inside. And he said, I get nothing. This stuff makes no sense. I'm getting nothing. And I said, okay, well, let's try one more thing. I said, how would you describe the nothing that you're feeling? It's just like usual. It's how it always feels. I said, okay, now I'll give you one more possibility. How it usually feels in your throat, how it usually feels in your chest. Is that the same or is it different? Oh, it's the same, he said. Yeah, just how it usually feels. I said, good. Okay, let's go further. I said, how it usually feels in your chest, how it feels right now. How it usually feels in your stomach, how it feels right now. Same or different? And he had a rather long silence. And then he said, well, actually, my stomach is tight. So he became a believer. We spent the whole rest of the time listening to the tight feeling in his stomach. And it had something to do with his relationship with his father, who asked a lot of him. And now he was a young father himself. He had a place in him that was worried about being responsible for somebody so young as his baby boy. It was a beautiful process. He left thanking me. I think his wife probably thanked me too.
That's really cool. Does this ever work in a couple's environment or with two people together? Is it really best when it's you alone with your body?
Couples can do it. I've taught focusing to couples, and they do focusing with each other as if one of them was the listener and the other one's the focuser. Focusing partnership is pretty common. So even when you're not a romantic or committed couple, people can just, like in a friendship, pair up and exchange these skills. But yeah, couples can do it with each other, and it's pretty amazing what can happen, how much you can work through the things that may be troubling you and learn how to be more curious and compassionate about what's going on for the other person. That's all pretty amazing.
Well, remember how you said, sometimes you can put your hand on the spot that feels tight or off, and, that seems to help. So I imagined two people, and one of them, was talking, and, my shoulders are really tight, so I noticed, and the other person, puts their hands on their shoulders just gently and has them sit there. I wonder if that would help if you discussed, between the two people how it felt as they did that, and, they're not massaging them or anything, but just putting hands on them. Does that seem to help the process? Has anyone tried that?
Well, I don't work that much with couples myself, but I certainly can imagine that going well. Yeah, I think that's a nice idea.
So how long have you sat with this concept and used it? And I don't know, what have you noticed about it by doing it for so long with so many people? You have a lot more experience than the average person, I would think.
I'm 75. I learned this process when I was 22. So that's 53 years of experience. And I went through a crisis about 30 years ago when I'd already been working with focusing for 22 years. I was a teacher of it. I was internationally known, sought out teacher teaching in other countries. But I was using it alcohol addictively. I had something that focusing at that time had not helped me with, and that was an addiction to alcohol. And it came to a crisis. I realized I had to face that I had that addiction, and that happened at a time when I was just about to teach some workshops together with a friend of mine, Barbara McGavin is her name. And I confessed to her what she had not even known about me, that I'd been getting drunk 4 nights a week, etc. And I said, I don't know what to do. And she said, well, let's try doing focusing with this. And she herself had some very serious issues that had to do with self-esteem and feeling bad about herself. And so we sat down and we traded focusing turns in every free moment. And after every session, we took notes on what we were discovering. And somehow the combination of being at a crisis point in both of our lives and the caring in our friendship and the fact that we both were very experienced with the method and we could invent new ways of using it, it shifted both of our issues, and we developed really new concepts of how to make use of this process. That was about 30 years ago. Ever since that happened, she and I have been teaching the method that we developed out of that crisis. And we've now written our first book about the method. So the method is called Untangling, and Untangling is a way of using focusing with the most difficult, tough issues in your life. And our book is called Untangling, How You Can Transform What's Impossibly Stuck. And what has happened in those 30 years since I first let go, I released my addiction to alcohol. There were a number of other areas of life. I was in a marriage at that time that really wasn't right for me, but I was not letting myself look at the truth about that. My relationships with people were often not very successful because I felt I had to hide a lot of who I was. So in many ways, even after 22 years of focusing, 30 years ago, my life was tangled up in a lot of ways. And in those 30 years since then, I've become so much more relaxed, free, open, successful at relationships, successful in my business, and somebody who's taught this work all over the world. So it's truly transformational.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any techniques that we haven't talked about that are part of untangling and not of focusing?
Well, we developed focusing. So untangling is a development of focusing, I would say. But the biggest difference from the focusing we learned to the untangling method is parts work. We discovered that if you have a tangle, it really helps to speak of yourself as having parts. So I needed to talk to the part that wanted to drink. And just as earlier I had talked to the part of me that didn't want to write, part that didn't want to drink, and the part that felt terribly ashamed and anxious and worried that I was going to drink again. I needed to find a way to disidentify from both of those parts. Because in order to listen to the part that wants to drink, I can't be coming from the part that's trying to control it or shame it. I need to be sitting in the seat of curiosity. And we started to call that ability to be with any part. We started to give it a name. We call it self-in-presence. So cultivating self-in-presence is the key to untangling. And seeing your tangle as having parts is another key. So the part of you that wants to work really hard and the part of you that wants to say, heck with it, I'm not going to do anything. Those two parts may be entangled, but there is a way to release yourself from that tangle and find what matters to you, what you really want to do with your life. So we were talking about blocks at the very start of our conversation today, how people get stuck and how tragic that is. So many of us have seen our friends or our family members. We can tell they're capable of doing things, getting a better job or doing the art they've always wanted to do or the music, and yet they don't do it. They never get around to doing it.
I want to ask you about this.
Yeah.
So I've literally heard the same thing from a bunch of people I've known. Like, someone will have a problem with XYZ, and it's like, well, why don't you do this, that, and the other? And they go, I know. Like they say, I know in a resigned, sad voice. And they're never going to do anything about it.
In other words, they've tried to do it, but they haven't. Well, but I think that's what we call an action block. And it doesn't do any good to tell yourself to do things that you're not doing. Because if you do that, if you become the inner scolder, you need to get up and get off your ass and so on. That doesn't work because it arouses the opposite part that resists being told what to do. So people get stuck because they're either stuck in one of those parts or the other one. They alternate all day between I know I should, I need to, versus, oh, to heck with it, I don't want to. Whereas I would help somebody like that disidentify, move apart from, unmerge with both of those parts. And I would say there's something that in you that really wants to do it. And there's another something in you that is so worried that you won't do it, that it keeps telling you what to do. It keeps telling you what you should do. Let's have a conversation with both of those where you're just going to listen. What I discovered was this should part of us, the one that says you're not doing enough, or you're going to fail, or why can't you be as good as that other person over there? The inner critic, it's always worried. If you drill down, if you spend a little time with it, you'll discover that this part that's telling you you're wrong, you're bad, you'll never do it, is actually worried about you. And I teach people how to turn toward their critical voices and say gently, might you be worried about me? And it's quite remarkable what happens then. It may take a little time because those are very entrenched parts of us. But over time, you disidentify from both the inner critic and the part of you that feels criticized and is resisting doing anything. And when you do that, your natural life force begins to flow, and you just find yourself doing things that you haven't been able to do, even without deciding to. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. One more thing. I know we're getting close to the time. What if someone has a depression? You know, every few weeks or every month or whatever, they fall into like a, pretty significant depression. They come out and they fall in and they come out. What have you seen like depressed people say to themselves to free themselves from it?
We'll have a chapter on that in our new book called Chapter 8, Despair. And my colleague, Barbara McGavin, had quite a lot of that in her life. When working with this process, we began to call it the pit of depression and despair. And actually, there's a whole interesting complex of things going on there where being depressed can actually feel safe at some level. Like at least you're at the bottom of the pit and nothing worse can happen. And it's kind of comfortable down there. And so then there's another part that says, cheer up, things aren't so bad, snap out of it. And of course, that's the one that doesn't help because the other one resists that part. So we need to be able to turn toward both and be a listener to what's underneath that, to what it's longing for and what it fears. So there's a way to work with depression, although of course if it's chemically related, clinical depression, you need some medication prescribed. But in most cases, I think just this process can be really valuable.
Depression can be a protective thing, just like these other emotions, procrastination,
Absolutely.
That kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Very, very helpful. Very good. And so how can people get started that are listening? Their interest is piqued. Do they start with the focusing or the untangling? Like where can people go?